Psychedelics are really important in the evolution of who we are as human beings. But I would say that there are pros and cons to what is happening now in the psychedelic world. Psychedelics are amplifying the narcissistic tendencies that are within us as humans and also in our culture. I see a lot of, I think, people in the Western psychedelic world using psychedelics to amplify more shadow parts within themselves, such as greed and money and sex and power. When I first found psychedelics, really wanting the pain to go away, right? So that was like my focus as a young child. I would like, or a young adult, I would just like take anything because I was really on a kind of death mission, I think.
Mm.
And I remember I'm divine, like I am divine. Like I can feel my light and like Atira is here, like I know my direct experience of the universe and the intelligence, which is bigger than me, is something which is not what I learned from my Christian faith.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Temple of Fire. This is a place where we hold truthful and heartful conversations about deep inner work, transformation, and what it means to heal, and how we can share this healing with the world. Today, I have Atira Tan as a guest. She's a woman who fits this description perfectly. She has walked every side of this work as a scholar, as someone who has lived through a deep trauma herself, as a psychonaut, and now as a guide, where she has built entire trainings out of what she has learned along the way. Welcome, Atira, to the Temple of Fire. It's an honor to have you as a guest. But first of all, I want to kind of bring in what is alive in you. What is your passion these days? What's burning in your heart and in your life at the moment?
Yeah, good question. Firstly, I just wanted to, just kind of welcome, everybody who's watching this podcast. It's really nice to connect. It's really nice to connect with you as well, Paul. We've known each other for some time. So I feel very honored and delighted to actually be here to have these discussions, and hopefully these discussions can support others as well who also offer a similar work too. So I think what is alive for me at the moment is, really kind of wanting to support, I think I just really wanting to create a psychedelic culture that is focused on safety and really practical kind of tools and tips around how to support people to heal from trauma in a way that is sustainable and also embodied. And um, I feel very passionate about, this kind of element of safety and also psychoeducation in supporting facilitators and psychedelic practitioners as this field expands and opens up in so many different ways at the moment, certain approaches that I resonate with and certain approaches that I don't resonate so much with. But I think that what's alive for me is a deep sense of care and nurturance, and also like protection of this world and psychedelics that can be, I think, so powerful for healing and also for the transformation of humanity. And yeah, I think that what's alive for me is to share with people, I think, the tools to actually to reconnect to what we call like inner healing intelligence. That is so supported, I think, with plant medicines and psychedelics when we enter this space. And because I think that, the world and humanity, it's you're really kind of going in a direction where I don't really feel very hopeful, I suppose, of us, number one, being loving towards ourselves, being compassionate towards ourselves, and creating a safe relationship, number one, I think, with ourselves, first of all. But then, how we relate to the greater world and to each other as a humanity and also with the planet and the earth. I think my broader vision and passion is to support and give people the tools that they can actually come into right relationship, I suppose, with themselves and embody that so that we can create really like tangible change in the world that we see, not just talking about it, not just being on social media, but actually, yeah, taking the right path and the right action forward to healing the world as a collective. And the certain things that I found most powerful and potent in my own personal healing journey, but also supporting others, is the somatic way of working. I think the somatic approach of that inner healing directed approach and that kind of right relationship and connection to the wisdom and intelligence in our bodies is a path towards sovereignty and also a path towards empowerment. And yeah, I really feel very passionate about that as well. So a project that I've been wanting to launch myself into is kind of writing a book around, somatic psychedelic integration and working with this somatic approach in with psychedelics and the plant medicine intelligence. But I think in a bigger kind of sense, I come from an activist background. So, yeah, what is really I feel inspired to do is to, yeah, also launch a campaign around bringing more awareness around sexual abuse in psychedelic spaces too.
Mm. Yeah.
And yeah, collaborating with different people to keep this plant medicine world safe because I really think that everybody matters and every story matters. And, the people that we work and serve as psychedelic practitioners, they really matter.
Mm.
And some of the things that are happening in this field is absolutely not okay for me. So, yeah, I think that that's also something that I feel very passionate about spreading both awareness and offering support to survivors who have been harmed in psychedelic spaces. Yeah.
Mm. Wow, yeah, so many fields I want to dive deeper into here, and from your activist career to the psychedelics. But maybe we go first into the psychedelics because I think it has been, or it's kind of blooming with the psychedelics and mushrooms. It's ayahuasca. It is, yeah, all kind of psychedelics around. You started quite early, and you have a long experience. How do you see the evolvement of the psychedelic space? Is it like a wild west now, or do you feel like we are taking steps towards a more trauma-informed approach? Yeah.
Good question. Well, first, I want to kind of name that psychedelics has been used, I would say, forever in cultures, right? I mean, just look at kind of plant medicines, they are bountiful.
Mm.
Just take, I live in Asia and, we have psychedelics here that grow up from the earth. And I believe that with all plants, they're here to serve us as medicine in one way or another. So I do kind of feel like before we kind of come into this conversation about the, like contemporary psychedelic world, to first like really pay respects, I think, to the traditions that have carried this body of work forward. So, in a lot of indigenous cultures, psychedelics have been used for celebration, for healing, for, connecting with different realms and different dimensions, connecting with the plant world so that, we can also heal ourselves with plants and with medicines. And I would also like to share that, what I understand from working with these indigenous cultures, like the body is so connected to it. When I've been and lived in some of these communities, what I understand is that they really work from a feeling mind and the sensing mind, which is very connected to, the body and this mind, this way of kind of knowing, which is in a way more holistic than just the intellect itself. And in traditional kind of cultures, I think that, we've always brought in dance and music and the arts with psychedelic use. So I think that that is actually inherently part of who we are in humanity, right? There are certain times of initiation where we need to decenter and come out of our routine and our kind of conditioning and way of thinking to actually open up to what is something bigger than just our routine and the daily lives and the role and our personality, that we have been shaped by our culture and our society, and also, our blueprint. So I think that psychedelics has and always have been has been a role to play. And personally, I came into psychedelics in a kind of different way, but it's for me kind of used in community, used in a way of kind of celebration, of connection, of connecting to something bigger than who we are. It's really a telescope as well. So it's a telescope for astronomy. I think there was a quote that I don't actually remember who it's by, but they kind of say that like psychedelics is a telescope for astronomy, right? So it really amplifies, but then also, on a psychological perspective, it also amplifies that connection to what might be inside in our psyche and our soul. So for these reasons, I feel like, psychedelics are really important in the evolution of who we are as human beings. But I would say that there are pros and cons to what is happening now in the psychedelic world. So psychedelics, as I see it, are amplifiers. They amplify what is within us. And if you have an intention, like for example, connecting to God or, connecting to the nature of consciousness, then that is, or perhaps amplifying perhaps the love that's inside of us and our human potential and self-actualization. I think that these can be incredible tools for that. But human beings are dual, right? We live in a dual world, which means that we have parts of us that are love and light, and there are also parts of us that come from shadow and darkness. And what I see is that, because I don't know, the way how society has evolved, I see a lot of, I think, people in the Western psychedelic world using psychedelics to amplify more shadow parts within themselves, such as greed and money and sex
Mm,
and power, which is
mm,
something I think that we all have, within all of us. Like we all have shadow and we all have light.
mm,
So for those out there, if there's if you find a facilitator that completely dismisses the shadow part of themselves, then I would say run the other way
mm,
because we all have these aspects within us,
mm,
and it is a great responsibility, I think, to steward the psychedelic movement.
mm,
Qualities like trustworthiness and integrity and moving from a place of love through action. If we choose to amplify that, then of course, that's amazing. However, I feel like in the psychedelic world, a lot of people are going in from a place that is, I would say, pretty narcissistic. And the world is narcissistic. We are feeling narcissism in our society. So it's not just the psychedelic world,
mm,
but it's just the global kind of trend that we're seeing, right?
mm,
Is, with social media and, you know, with the way kind of things are going in the world, it is, I'm not sure if it's really kind of Yeah, I'm feeling that psychedelics are amplifying the narcissistic tendencies that are within us as humans and also in our culture. It's because we are brought up in a culture that, we don't really think about like giving back, for instance.
Mm.
We don't kind of think about the principle of reciprocity. We live in a culture that is in survival mode. So the things that, help us to survive are not things like love and light. They are actually money, and
Mhm.
power and authority. So when psychedelics fall into the hands of folks that perhaps are leaning towards that tendency of narcissism, I think that that is really dangerous, if I was to be completely honest. And also, how it's getting medicalized and, uh, brought down to a pill with the governments having a certain agenda. For example, extracting, iboga and turning it into pill and helping, soldiers to fight more wars,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
amplifying, destruction and death and killing and more trauma. Psychedelics and everything in life, they are, in my perspective, quite neutral.
Mm.
So
Mm.
it's like the person that is taking it, it really responds to where we are at. So if, as a society, we lean more on narcissistic tendencies, then that is actually what I feel like psychedelics are amplifying, and that there's a lot of taking and a lot of businesses around, psychedelics and the medicalization of, psychedelics, which are pros and cons, but I do have a lot of concerns around that as well. The
Mm.
other concern that I also have is that there is no kind of accountability with psychedelic work. There is mostly an underground culture. So, as a lot of the students that I train, I mean, some of them are really like yourself, so in integrity and, coming from a place of humility and cultural humility and this openness of wanting to learn. Maybe largely actually due, Paul, and I can share that, like, because I know you personally. It's your own work, the work the healing work that you've done and committed to over decades, that has shaped you into the incredible, I think, ceremonialist that you are. A lot of people nowadays that come to psychedelics are kind of swept up in like maybe the hype of psychedelics, that it's like cool and people will have a good experience. But sometimes I wonder if they kind of lack that commitment and dedication to their own healing. And so therefore there are a lot of, I think, with this new kind of wave, people that are not as experienced and not as open, to learning and yeah, just not having enough kind of spiritual or emotional or even psychological maturity. And I think that that can be really harmful because psychedelic spaces are so vulnerable and people actually do need a lot of attunement and people need a lot of care and presence and um, yeah, like safety. And there needs to be a lot of education around that and experience and mentorship and supervision. And I see a lot of overriding of those kind of steps
Mm.
to becoming, a person that's a guide or, somebody that's really holding space for some really big imprints to come up. And because people are so open, the risk of re-traumatization or like the risk of harm, is magnified and amplified. So it really kind of goes either way. If
Mm.
you're with a facilitator that's really well trained, that has integrity, that really comes from a place of, being open to learn and, that's not really around the ego, but really from a place of love, of service, then yes,
Mm.
then there's good things that will come out from that. But a lot of the time I see very inexperienced people that come into this space with not much support or supervision. And you can have 10 amazing experiences and just one, experience where a person is harmed. And I think that that person really matters. And a lot of the time, that one person is either overridden or dismissed, and I find that really concerning.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think we should have maybe even more respect for the psychedelic and the medicine and what kind of spaces we are going in or entering in, but also feeling into myself. Talking for me personally, I'm happy that psychedelic and ayahuasca came when I already have done like 20 years of personal development and had some experience of non-duality consciousnness and ego death and so it's like for everyone to feel, am I ready to go on such a big journey? Um, you talked about facilitators and there is different how to say level of experience, and also I think both also have to be aware also in the jungle or going to native culture. There's also can also be different shamans there with different experience. How can we know, or how can, if people listening, okay, I have a sincere wish and I think I have the resilience to go on a journey. How can I? What is the best or good approach to find a retreat center or find a space where there is safety or where the space is held? How can we know
So, as a participant,
as a
you mean?
participant? Yeah.
Right, yeah. I highly actually recommend the book written by my colleague called Coming Full Circle. So this book written by Shannon Duncan called Coming Full Circle, and I think that it's a very helpful book for participants because he's a participant himself. He's not a facilitator, and he shares his experience mostly about screening facilitators. So there's a chapter in his book that's really well written and really quite comprehensive around some of the questions that participants can start to ask either retreat centers or, asking facilitators or any kind of coach or trip sitter even. Some very kind of important questions that are connected to safety. So there are kind of a few levels here. What I would like to empower, I think, participants is to know that you can ask as many questions as you need in order to ascertain if this is the right person or the right center for you. And to kind of tune in firstly, like to your own needs as well, right? What is maybe your intention? What is some of your history that you kind of know about yourself? What are certain layers of support that is important for you to have? And to also, before you start interviewing, the people that you're working with, um, to kind of connect to what helps you to feel safe on the inside, like the felt sense of safety on the inside. And I think that this is a question, an inquiry that most people don't notice, so they haven't really explored, right, within themselves. But I think that it would be very helpful to take a moment, right, before you go on an experience to be clear about what you would like to get out of. If you have an intention of healing trauma, then what imprint you are working with, and to actually connect to what this imprint might need in order to feel safe. To also, I have actually a document that I could share with you that you can share with your audience too. Like there are I've created these documents of some safety flags as well. Like there are some green flags and yellow flags and red flags that when you're kind of interviewing folks that you can kind of start identifying. Um, but basically, I think that if you have certain needs, right, in a session, like for example, you might have a need of space or maybe a need for certain boundaries or a need for different layers of support. If the retreat center doesn't have a culture of that, I think that it would be better to go somewhere else where you can find what you need in order to feel safe in the retreat center. Then I think the next part is really also about rapport as well. There are certain people I think that resonate on different kind of frequencies. So when you're interviewing the facilitator, I would really take your time. And sometimes you might need more than one session for the interview. Maybe sometimes you need two or three sessions because things start to come up. To notice how safe do you feel with the person, like even in a Zoom call. Like, is a person attentive to you? Are they asking you the right questions? Do they seem professional? Are they consistent? Do they seem trustworthy? Are they clear about their protocols of safety? Is something that you can ask them. What happens if, ABC happens and, tell me how you would respond to a certain, situation that might come up. So, if you feel like, okay, there's something that doesn't feel right, or if you are in the kind of field of the facilitator or the guide, and something just feels a little bit off, in your felt sense, I would really invite people to trust that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
But I think that what is really important is the qualities of your facilitator as well as their, education level, um, the way that they're communicating, that they're speaking to you, like if they're actually attentive and really listening to understand, or are they listening to give you advice? I think that that's also an indicator as well. And to ask the right questions, that I would recommend this book because it has some very good questions that can be very helpful and supportive.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you. I know that you were diving into the psychedelic space quite early. What was kind of, if we bring it a little bit back there to your personal journey as well, um, what brought you the interest of psychedelics, and yeah, what was your experience in the beginning?
Wow, how much time do we have? Um, so I think that with saying, talking a little bit about my entry into psychedelics, we first have to talk a little bit about my early childhood because I think that that is a really big part of it.
Hmm.
So I'm a CPTSD survivor. I was born in Singapore and immigrated over to Australia. And my time in Singapore, and then I was also born into a Christian cult. So I was born into a Jehovah's Witness family where my father was a priest and my mother was a missionary. So I grew up with, I don't know, so many different layers of complexity, of layers of trauma, since I was an infant.
Hmm.
Um, the being born into a cult, it was extremely oppressive. My mother suffered from comorbid diagnosis of mental illness, which meant that she was extremely violent on a lot of levels. I think physically or emotionally and psychologically, and obviously being born into a Christian cult, the spiritual and religious aspect of it. But then the society, I think, and the politics of Singapore, I think it was very interesting for me to be born in a family environment that was extremely oppressive. So just to give you an example, the thing that distinguishes a Christian cult is that they believe that only they're going to be saved by God, right? And then everyone else is bad. So this is like extreme kind of black and white kind of thinking. So everything was bad, everything on TV, everything on the radio, and just as a child and a being, art has always been very important to me. Music has been very important to me. And if, for example, if my family caught me listening to the radio, then I would just get severely beaten. So that happened almost every single day. So that is just an example of the upbringing that I was born in. But then, politically, Singapore, I would say, is a dictatorship. And so, politically, in and of itself, like, it's just very oppressive because it's a dictatorship. So you don't have much freedom to do anything and to really, for somebody who's wild, free, and creative like myself that thinks very much outside of the box. And this is something that is, I think, a very good quality that I have to think outside of the box in my neurodivergent mind. There's not a lot of safety for, I think, people like that on a cultural, political and societal kind of level. So I'm just naming this because to kind of share like the atmosphere, like the general atmosphere that was born in. And I think that as a young child, I remember being 9 and I was just like, this thing about the Jehovah's Witness, like, this is absolutely not for me, like, this is so far away from who I actually am as a soul, as a human being, even as a child, I knew that. So, in my teenage years, when I went into like high school, I already started to, rebel a lot and actually got into quite a lot of trouble. And obviously, somebody who has been through so much trauma and so much oppression. I remember as a young person just wanting to die, so I just like, I was very kind of like open to taking a lot of risks. And I think that there was like so much pain, I think, inside of me to the point where I think as a teenager, I lived a little bit outside of my body, right? Because it was hard for me to be in my body. And as a result, having these like risk-taking kind of behaviors, I think at a young age, I was already, looking for experiences that would take me outside of myself, that I would run away from my pain. And I think that part of it, actually, at a very young age, I went to a psychiatrist, and all he did was prescribe me just so much, antipsychotic and antidepressants as a young person. And so I think that when I first found psychedelics, really wanting the pain to go away, right? So that was like my focus as a young child. I would like, or a young adult, I would just like take anything because I was really on a kind of death mission, I think. I was very lost and very confused. And I think very serendipitously, I found I had a connection with a really beautiful human being that just really saw my light. And he said, look, we're part of this community, psychedelic community. I would really love to offer you this journey of doing a hero's dose. And I'm going to sit for you and we're going to go on this journey. And I was quite young. This was in 1996. So, being the young person, risk-taking, character that I am, I was like, great, let's go on a heroes. I didn't know what it meant or what it was going to entail. I just felt a very deep connection with this person, and he was quite wise, and he had, a lot of kind of experience with guiding people. And we went on this experience. So, he was really my guide, I think, with psychedelics. I think the first hero's psychedelic experience I had as a young person, I had this incredible experience where I felt this kind of lightning bolt that came into my body, and I had so much protection because I needed so much protection from, as I mentioned, the culture, the politics, my family, and it just completely broke and split, I think, the armor, I think, that I had. The armor
Mm.
of like number one, disassociation. I was like severely disassociated. Broke through the armor of, shame and I think guilt and all the, Christian conditioning around that. It just pierced through everything. And what I felt was this like direct connection to, um, we call it God or, higher intelligence, the spirit or whatever it was, which was in my body. And it was just full of love and full of light. And, I remember just crying and crying and crying and sobbing for hours. It felt like hours, but it was a
Mm.
good cry, it was a
Yeah.
cry of like all of the pain, right? That I didn't really know how to process as a child and a young person. All of that just like coming out like a tsunami. And I was so happy that I was crying. Like I was so happy. It wasn't like a overwhelming like sobbing. It was sobbing and a mixture of both pain but also happiness.
Mm.
And I remember I'm divine, like I am divine. Like I can feel my light and like Atira is here, like I can feel Atira now without like all the fogginess of disassociation and, protection and all of that, all my parts. I think from an internal family systems lens, I connected to my blueprint. I connected to like self energy. And this was a bigger experience, especially coming from the religious dogma that I had been entrained into of, being God-fearing and, et cetera, et cetera. Very extreme, lens of Christianity. And I like to share that I don't feel that all Christianity has such an extreme lens, but I was born into such an extreme lens of Christianity. Um, a lot of shame and a lot of fear and a lot of guilt. I was like, well, my direct experience of God is good. My direct experience of the universe and the intelligence, which is bigger than me, is something which is not what I learned from my Christian faith. And I think that that was a very pivotal, I think, moment for me to reconnect to who I am, my light, to have a connection to spirit. I think, like for me, I am a highly, deeply like spiritual person. And it gave me a direct experience of that. And it really opened me to what, the qualities of a higher power is, like a direct experience of that, which I think is bigger than any book or any scripture or anything, is your direct relationship with something that is higher than yourself, like your ego or your personality. Um, so
Can I go in
you
here
want
a
to
little?
pause? Yeah.
Go a little, just a question, because I'm really, really happy that you had this divine experience, this opening, and this direct experience of God inside of you. And taking your training, I would say, like, with your background, if I was mapping your background and then take you on a hero's dose, wow, I'm really happy that you had the resilience to meet all of this and sobbing and all of that. It seems like you had a good guide as well who could hold
I
space
would
for you.
definitely not recommend this to any 16-year-old out there.
No.
Like, dude, absolutely 100% not. I would not recommend this. At the same time, I must say that my guide was incredibly skilled. And he was just, I'm just so grateful. And I feel like emotional right now, kind of thinking about this experience because he was a really, really good person for me. And
Mm.
he really cared about me. Like he just saw something inside of me that he was like, we have to take this girl. We have to bring her to, she has so much potential. Like we need to like support her in this way and offer her this experience. And yeah, so I'm very, very grateful. He was so skilled about being there for me while, I was going through the grief and, the happiness of connecting back to my higher self. But then he also gave me a lot of space, as well. And he did that so skillfully. And I think that then, because he was also part of a community, so I was introduced to that community. And he really gave me a lot of tools around like meditation. So before that, I had no idea about like spirituality or, no idea about like Buddhism or Taoism or Hinduism or yoga or Jung or depth psychology because, with my background with the cult, everything is bad. So all of that is like, from the devil. But he really introduced me to meditation, and I loved meditation the moment that I found meditation. For some people, I know that it's very difficult, but for me, it felt like it was something that I had done for like lifetimes, and he really kind of taught or opened me up to the skill of taking psychedelics and meditating, and really trying to understand, like for me, my intention always was like understanding the nature of consciousness, understanding who I am, and using psychedelics to go deeper into the philosophies, Eastern philosophies of, yoga, which I think is an incredible map for the nature of consciousness, and really healing myself with like depth psychology and really having these maps to really kind of go into understanding who I am. And this was very important for me. Like the maps is part of my integration process, right? Because like you are so, I come from such a staunch Christian background, and suddenly, yeah, I think the integration process was unfolded over many years and would say it's still unfolding. But he did, I think with that community, I learned so much about how to, yeah, like meditate and all these kind of practices that I could use with psychedelics to expand consciousness. And a lot of the integration process, like reading so many books and trying to understand, what happened for me, and healing my own trauma and complex trauma with psychedelics. And also, I think at that time, I did fine arts as my bachelor's. So I am an artist. I would identify as being an artist, and using psychedelics to actually enhance creativity and to create from that space. I learned so much about that too. So I think that actually phase of my life was really amazing. But there are many phases of a person's psychedelic journey, and everybody's really different, as you probably know. But then when I found ayahuasca, I think in 2004, then that was really my serious initiation into, I would say, the inner underworld
Yeah.
of all my complex trauma and the CPTSD and so much grief from my childhood. And yeah, so I left the church, and so my parents excommunicated me because that's what you do as in a
Mm.
cult. And there's just a lot of like pain, and I think a lot of pain and grief that I would say, to be realistic, I'm not sure if ayahuasca was that wonderful for that. It opened up a lot of things that I saw in the Pandora's box, so to speak,
Yeah.
but I didn't have the tools back at that time to digest those experiences. And this is why I'm so passionate about what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
Because for a long time, I think with ayahuasca and kind of with psilocybin, I was more fragmented then I received healing. I saw a lot of things. I saw my own pain in many different ways. But I don't think that I had those layers of support to really help me digest the pain that I was finally in touch with. And there were many ceremonies where it was just too much for me. And it, it like amplified my disassociative nature as a protector instead of, being able to metabolize it and bring it back into a place of like feeling more wholeness. So this is also part of the reason why I feel so passionate, because I have really been through such a long history and experimentation with psychedelics and healing trauma with psychedelics.
Yeah, you have experienced it and you've seen, yeah, your tendency of dissociating because it's, yeah, with ayahuasca, it's so powerful. So it's how to fully own the experience and from a more relaxed nervous system. And I know you got, I know time is running out. There's so many things I want to talk to you about, but you had like this turning point also where you had been journeying for a long time, and then there was coming a message, or you got a revelation that yeah, you know a lot about cosmos, you know a lot about the outer world, but it's actually about time to integrate and come more into the body, and that was, as I understand, also a part of your mission now, would to have a trauma informed approach to psychedelics and to, yeah, to ayahuasca, mushroom, all powerful medicine. Can you share briefly about that as well, and what you are doing now, and how this has formed your work you are doing now, and how you're educating facilitator now to bring more a trauma informed lens to the retreats and to the ceremonies?
Right. Yeah. How much time do we have? Let's do a little time check. Okay.
5 minutes.
So, that's a really good, I think, a way to wrap it up. Unfortunately, I think that, having a kind of trauma-informed lens came from also another experience of pain and suffering. So, on my first ever ayahuasca ceremony, back in 2004, I was sexually assaulted by the facilitator, and he called himself a shaman. And it was kind of a very bad experience, I think, on many different levels. So first, it was the experience with the, facilitator himself that was very shocking. But then also it was the community as well, because after what happened, and I told my friends, obviously it was like a friendship group that we had this ceremony together, and I told my friends what happened, and they just completely normalized that kind of behavior that came from the facilitator. And they even told me that, he's just like that, and, he preys on young, women, and they'd seen it before in other ceremonies, and that's normal for him to do that. And I was just, as a person working in trafficking and sexual abuse and really understanding my rights as a woman and what's okay and what's not okay, I was absolutely shocked with, well, his actions, but also the response for the community. Then many years later, like 10 years later, I live as well in Ibiza, and I heard that the same facilitator was again running ceremonies, and a good friend of mine was supporting him, and I told her about my experience, and again I had the same experience from somebody even very close to me, that went ahead and supported him, knowing that that was my experience with him. So I was really quite shocked around, how much I think in the spiritual world we tend to normalize, I think, abuse and exploitation. But when you have been harmed, I think, by a facilitator, and you already have, I mean, I have a distrust of authority because of my background, and also because I am a therapist, and, I have been working with many therapists in my own healing journey, and I know what feels safe for me and what feels right. When I go into these ceremonies, I also see facilitation from that lens, right? As a trauma specialist, and also yeah, just kind of my lens of yeah, of how, certain things are just not okay. And I also know exactly what I need to feel safe. And I can map out the gaps, right? There are these gaps between the underground psychedelic world and how things are being facilitated. And I wanted to find a way to bridge that gap. So moving forward, I think pivotal moment is moving to Peru and setting up, healing retreats with Elio and being on very long dietas where, we're in isolation and communing with the medicine. And there was this very beautiful relationship that I had with one of the master plants where, it was just very direct kind of downloads about like the trauma-informed plant medicine kind of paradigm, kind of building on also my own experience as a trauma specialist as well. And basically, being supported to bridge that gap between what is really essential for safety. So, yeah, so moving forward from that, I was very resistant because the medicine was like, you need to go into the world and share this information. And I was like, well, I'm really, really quite busy and I'm very focused on my mission with the charity. But as a series of events unfolded, especially like with the pandemic, it gave me the opportunity to kind of step up and share more of this work. So I run a number of programs around teaching other people around how to really hold space in a very skillful way, especially with complex trauma, the more complex imprints with the somatic kind of psychology model. I have a program for facilitators, which is the trauma-informed plant medicine facilitation program, which is a very comprehensive program around how to work with somatic intelligence that we all have, the inner healing intelligence, with plant spirit or plant medicine intelligence. And it's a very comprehensive course because I teach preparation, facilitation, and also post-ceremony care. It's a foundational program. I think that everybody should have this, in my opinion, this education, in addition to first aid, which is foundational, about how to work with people, how to work with complexity when it arises skillfully and with confidence. Then I have an integration program because I was the head of integration preparation for about 7 years. So I really love the phase of integration. I think it's extremely deep. So I teach a model that I've created around somatic plant medicine integration. I have a mentorship program, an advanced mentorship program for more experienced practitioners that are working with clients that need supervision and that peer support that you've also been part of. And recently, I also launched a somatic foundations program for safe psychedelic practice, which is for everybody, whether you are a participant or somebody who is interested in using psychedelics or even a practitioner. I'm giving people skills to how to listen to the body and work with inner healing intelligence in psychedelics so that you can really feel empowered and prepared for psychedelic sessions. So that's a new program that I've launched that I feel is a beautiful way of kind of preparing actually for the psychedelic journey, giving people tools on that and how to work with the medicine, but through the body, because as you know, the medicine works in our physiology.
Mm.
Yes, and I teach on a number of other faculties as well, other wonderful psychedelic programs out there too, like
Mm.
Synthesis and the Embodied Lab and BMed and Inward Bound and ICEERS. So grateful to also be part of that community where we are really focused on keeping people safe too. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. I have participated in your programs again and again, and I'm really, really grateful. I think I've been 5 years and taking your programs again, and I feel it's such a big and beautiful mix of the psychological, somatic, yeah, hardcore scientific approach with your experience of going deep in dieta and experience with the psychedelics. And so I'm really, really happy for you, for your work, and for everything you bring into the world. And thank you also for coming to the Temple of Fire and sharing your wisdom. And I would love to hear more. There's so many things more I would love to speak about the trauma and the hype of the trauma informed and what is the real thing. But that we can maybe do another time. But thank you so much for coming this time. I really appreciate, and I love to listen to your experience and your deep wisdom and knowledge. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Paul. I really am very grateful for this opportunity to share, with your audience and with you. And always a pleasure to reconnect over and over again over the years. Yeah, thank you.
It is. Thank you so much. Ciao, ciao.